Okay, folks, let me share my screen with you. And away we go. So, talk a little bit about weight management. Um, this is chapter 11. So, what I want to cover here today is just some basic ways that we measure ourselves and our weight, and whether it's lean or um, fat mass. There's a couple of different ways that we can do this. And let me, where are we here? Okay. So we can do there's some advantages and disadvantages to this, and you can read through these, but it basically comes down to this. uh, Body composition in general tends to be inaccurate, right? So we, for years and years and years, we've built a database in the health industry using skin fold calipers, which we'll talk about here in a second, and just about everything off of is based off of that. Now, granted, we can do really good body composition measurements, but that requires um, to do it really accurate, we basically need to do an autopsy, right? So we can measure and divide everything out and look at subcutaneous fat versus visceral fat and the whole makeup. And that obviously isn't something that we want to do. So the other thing that we've done then, and we'll go through them, are different ways we can measure, either through water displacement or air displacement, or sometimes we can just pinch and then do some calculations that kind of assesses for subcutaneous fat and not necessarily visceral fat. Visceral is the stuff that's on the other side of your muscle that lines your internal organs and things like that. It's visceral stuff that we can't actually grab. So there are some advantages and some disadvantages to this, but it basically comes down to this. We can use body composition as a baseline, and that's all we should really use it as. So we can see if there's some improvements or some deficits that we've fallen into if we just form a basic baseline, because they're really 3 or 4% off either direction. With that being said, let's kind of go through it and we'll look at body composition. So most of us will use a 2-compartment model that's either fat or free fat. Free fat is considered lean. Okay, so that's the stuff other than fat. And then we could do a 4-compartmental model that takes a lot more effort and expense, and it can look at not only fat but minerals, which is bones, proteins, which is muscle, and then of course the water weight that we hold, and we're 60 to 70% water, most of us, depending on who you read and your body type. So we're basically going to stick to the 2-compartmental model, and in this lecture we'll talk about skin fold thickness, hydrodensity, and bioelectric impedance, and then fast morphography. If you can say that 5 times fast, go ahead. So here's skin fold thickness. This is kind of the gold standard. It was highly portable. It was pretty inexpensive, and the calipers, you could get them. You can get a cheaply made one for a couple of bucks. The more expensive ones are a little more accurate for 30, 40 bucks. So and they're portable. You can carry them around with you. The issue with these is well, maybe I should say this first. We have a huge database. Most of you, thanks, Seneca. Most of you have probably experienced this. I know that when I was in elementary school, they would pinch us once a year, and I think they were still developing the database, and we did something called the presidential fitness of merit or something like that, and we do a bunch of exercises and they'd measure us. And anyway, they, over the years, the last 40 years, they've built a huge database on skin fold measurement, so you really don't even have to do the calculations longhand. They have charts on everything now. These are some examples of the calipers that you can buy. The bigger one there that's fan shaped is one of your less expensive ones. The one just to the left of that is one of your more expensive ones. They all pretty much work the same. They're based on they base it on measuring in millimeters, and they pinch you. So it does predict it. We assume that it predicts non-subcutaneous fat or visceral, but most of our fat is subcutaneous, so it does an okay job with that. There are some variations with this on site selection, just depending on where you feel comfortable pinching somebody. There's 3 and 8 and 6. There's all kinds of different 5-site different places you can pinch. When I was in school, they obviously, because we were kids, they just did I've been to 3 of them. So they do an upper body where they pinch bicep, tricep, and stomach, or they'll do a bicep, stomach, and thigh. So there's a few different ways to do it. They have data on all of those and charts on all of them. So here's the thing, is that how I would measure somebody, my pinch may be different than somebody else's pinch. So once you get measured by one person, if you're going to form a foundation or a baseline, you need to go back and get pinched by that same person, because they're probably their skill is going to be more accurate or more consistent. So you need to go back to the same technician over and over again, which is sometimes not possible to do. So once again, we're not, this isn't a perfect measurement. This does poorly predict visceral fat, because some of us may carry fat that's not subcutaneous. Some of it may be a little bit deeper. So there are some, once again, it's the best we can do with what we've got. So here's an example of how it gets pinched. You can read through it, and then of course you would pinch it, keep a hold of the skin, put the caliper on, take the measurement, release the caliper, release the skin. Because if you pull that caliper on while it's pinched, well, it hurts. So here's an example of a foresight measurement. So here's a bicep, tricep, abdominal, and scapula. I mean, obviously this is fine, right, if you're working with a bunch of male athletes, but some of these, you just, kids or female athletes may not want to remove their shirt. So there's just all kinds of things that you have to kind of be aware of before you choose what sort of skin fold measurement that you want to do. Like I said, there's a dozen of them. So just if you're going to do this, or if you're going to have this done, you can pick the sites that you want. Here's just an example of the charts that they come up with, and basically they'll add up. For example, this is a 4-site, so they'll measure up the millimeters for each one and total them. So for 4 sites, this, let's say you're at a 16 here, then they go to your age group, and let's say you're 16 to 29, and your fat percentage would then be 6.7. So there's a large calculation that does this, but they've done it so many times now that they've got charts that are up. So let's say your 4 sites equal 80, and let's say you're 49 years old, you're 31.2. So that's basically how it works. And if you're female, there's a chart for you as well. Here's a 2-site one. This is pretty popular. Once again, the more sites that you do, the better, the more accurate you're going to be, right? Because now you've got, you're not just looking at 2 places. Like someone may not be very, they may not carry their fat on their arms. So this may give you a false impression of where their, what their percent body fat is. And the other example may be true too, is that you might, pick the site test where they carry all their fat, and and then it predicts fat everywhere. So you really do have to use some common sense when you do these techniques to make sure that you get the right sites for that person. This is another way that you can look at it for calculation or for reference sake. Once again, millimeters up here at the top. Instead of just numbers, they give you words as well. So very high percent body fat, optimal range body fat. So excuse me. So there's different ways you can present the information. Body mass index is another way that we've done it, and body mass index is based on all the data that we have taken from SkinFold, and they have looked at SkinFold and based it on height and weight measurements. Excuse me. And so they now can look, they've developed a chart based on those skin folds and height and weight, and they're fairly predictable. And so they've made this thing called the body mass index. Now, body mass index is not as accurate with elderly, with children, or for athletes. So if you tend to be really muscular or really tall and really muscular, and all those components add up, it may or may not be that accurate for you. For example, LeBron James, many of you are familiar with LeBron James, who's an NBA athlete, 6'8", about 230 pounds, is considered borderline overweight. And that's not true. I mean, LeBron James, if you look at him, he's doesn't have a lot of fat on him, so he's not really overweight. But according to the BMI, because it is based on general measurements and general skin fold, he would be, according to BMI. So be careful with BMI. It's a good, really general population kind of thing. But in the extremes, age and the extremes, muscle wise, it may not be that accurate. Thing to consider with BMI as well is that they use BMI for just about all of our obesity studies. So now when they mention, children of the age of whatever, so many are obese, they're just using BMI. They're just using height and weight. So no one's really going out and measuring percent body fat with any other calculations other than taking kids' height and weight. So may or may not be accurate. So just be careful with BMI. It's close and it's good for general population, but I don't know, you can use this and look for yourselves and see where you're at, and maybe it is, or maybe it isn't accurate. Hydrodensity, this is basically difficult to do if you're not comfortable in water. So this person is submerged here in this picture. What you do need to do with this is only have reserve volume of air in your lungs. So once you're dunked under the water, you exhale all of your air that you're having, and you blow it all out, and then you just maintain just as calm and still as you can be until they measure. They take the weight, and then they run a calculation with the weight in the water, you out of the water, and they look at displacement, so, or weight of displacement. So that's how they do that. It's difficult to do. You need a tank. You need someone who can hold their breath and not be afraid of exhaling underwater. So not necessarily something that's commonly used. The one that we did when I was in college, we didn't have a scale. We actually did by volume. We carried a 5-gallon like a Sparkletts water thing, and we filled it partially with water, and then we would hold on to that and either sink, and if we sank to the bottom of the pool, then we'd empty it. We take a little water out, and then we'd add a little, take away a little, until we hovered in the water. And the same principle applied. We had to exhale all of the air and then hover in the water, and then they did a calculation based on our weight and volume displaced in using the water bottle thing. So it was difficult to do, but I got paid $10 for doing it in college. But there's different ways to do hydrodensity. None of them are very comfortable if you're not a swimmer. Once again, measurement of residual lungs, so you got to blow out all the air. If you move around a little bit, throws the scale off. It's certainly expensive. So this isn't something that they do a lot of. We did this in college for somebody's experiment, but that's the only time I've ever seen it done. I've never seen it done for percent body fat in public. So this one's interesting. This is air displacement. Let me just show you a picture of it. So you see the notes there. So if you want to take a closer look, you can use the PDF. But this is basically how it works. It's the same principle, only we're displacing air. So they have a little blue tube here that carries the air into the tank for you, and they measure that so they know how much pressure. And then it's your body mass inside of a given space, and they run a calculation and they can determine percent body fat. Once again, not super accurate, because you could be really, really muscular and take up a lot of space too, right? And then so the numbers can be thrown off. This is just another picture of it. Once again, super expensive. If you're a little claustrophobic, it's not going to work. And once again, if it depends on your body type, right? So it might be good generally, but for the extremes of body type, like super muscular, super thin, may not work. It's super expensive. Been through this. Okay, so this is the kind of the new wave that we're doing now. It's bioelectrical impedance analysis. And basically they run an electric current through you. And some of you may have done this here at EAC. We have at the Wellness Center, we have a handheld one. Here in our lab, in the Human Performance Lab here, we have one it's a scale that runs it through your lower extremity and a handheld. So it's a current is such a low amp that you don't even know it's there. And of course, the more fat that you are, the more water you have, and so the faster the electrical impulse travels. They measure how quickly the impulse is, and they do a calculation on that, and can get an idea of a percent body fat that way. This is kind of the theory. We're just basically made up of cylinders, some thick, some thin, some dense, some not so dense, and we do measurements based on how quickly the impulse travels through those cylinders, the resistance through those cylinders. So you can look at this again, and it's not super important other than the fact that it's just based on physics and fairly accurate. It's not any worse than skin fold, and certainly no one's going to pinch you. So this is kind of where everybody's going now in the fitness industry and in healthcare, to look at more of an accurate look at percent body fat if you don't have like a CAT scan or some other scan that you're going to do. This one works pretty good. Certainly probably better than BMI. It's not even that expensive anymore. We just picked up our scales for about $30 each, and they do both. The one that's pictured on the screen you can get for like $15, so they're pretty inexpensive now. They're the same accuracy. They're no worse or better than hydro density, and they're about the same as the pinching the caliper, so skin fold. So this is the way to go. Okay, I really like this chart. I just want you to know that, because when it comes to percent body fat, we need to look at ranges, because people are of different body types. So the range that I really want you to focus on are the unhealthy range high and the unhealthy range low. The reason for that is you get some of the same risk factors for unhealthy range low and unhealthy range high, which is both cardiovascular disease, diabetes issues, and things like that. They both affect in those ranges. So in some studies, even the low range being too thin, not enough percent body fat, and you're at just as high, if not higher, a risk of cardiovascular disease because of your poor nutrition. So calories also equals vitamins and minerals in and out. So understand that. So when you look at unhealthy range too low, less than 5% for males and less than 8% for females. Unhealthy high is greater than 25% for males and greater than 32% for females. Anything in between, anything between 6 and 24 for men and 9 and 31 for women is just fine, right? Because we're talking about inaccuracies up to 3 to 4%. So, right, if you're at 10% and you're a male, you're doing fine, right? So you're in that range. Same for females. If you're at 20%, you're doing fine. You're in the range. So don't overthink this, right? This is about foundations or baselines. And if you're in the acceptable range, either high or low, you're doing just fine, and then work towards your goals based on that. Now, if you're in the unhealthy ranges, then certainly you need to work at getting out of those unhealthy ranges. This is the one that I want you to use when I on the exams, only because I really want you to focus on these percentages. These are good. This is a pretty good chart. I prefer it to just, the big, huge ones that, break it down to every single percentage. Because once again, if you were going to measure percent body fat, you're going to be inaccurate 3 to 4% either direction. So it would be better not to look so precisely. It's better to look at ranges. And so that's why I put it up here. American Academy of Sports Medicine in 2000 put out a position paper, and it still holds today. Once again, we have an error of 3 to 4%. So it is inherently variable, has an inherent variability, and we really should just use it as a foundation and look at it. 3 to 4% in either direction is like saying plus or 7 pounds on a 110-pound individual. So just get it in your head that if you're going to do percent body fat, it's not super accurate. So don't overthink the range that it gives you, or the number it gives you. Just some information on obesity. I took these off. I should update this. I just saw the new CDC came out with one, and American College of Sports Medicine came out with one. So anyway, this is pretty accurate. It's still, our obesity rates are going up for adults. They're dropping a little bit for children, and you can see why with calorie counts in 1996. And it's higher now. Our calorie counts 3 years ago, so that would have been 2014 or 13 was 1996, and then now it's 2,234. So this keeps creeping up, and that explains why our obesity rates are going up. A ton of money is spent on this, and It's just it's one of those issues that we can do something about, but it takes a little bit of effort. I'm not sure if the United States is still 8th fattest. We're pretty close. Mississippi still is, last I checked, the fattest state. I don't remember the fattest country in the world, but it's an Arab country. It's not Saudi Arabia, somewhere over there, which is interesting to me. Okay, so just some health concerns. I think most of us know these. There's certainly surgical risks with the added weight, both orthopedic and otherwise. There's the list goes on. You can read it as well as I can. So the longer you stay in an unhealthy range, the greater your risk factor. When we look at regional distribution, we name these. We can characterize them into 2 terms. One is abdominal or android, and males tend to be android or apple shape, and females tend to be lower body weight distribution or gynoid. The caveat to this is that women, once they hit menopause, tend to, when they lose estrogen, their testosterone levels then appear to be elevated. Well, because you have both, that it causes you to gain weight as an android now, so apple shape. So you get the best of both worlds, which is really kind of disheartening, I would imagine. So anyway, those are the common shapes. It doesn't mean that you have to follow that pattern, but the majority does. So males in the android, we tend to have a higher degree of or a higher chance of cardiovascular disease because of where the fat distribution is, and of course type 2 diabetes for both. Just kind of what I talked about just a second ago. If you want to look at that for waist measurements, typically greater than 40 inches for men and greater than 35 inches for women, and you're considered an android. So there you go. Okay, so the idea here is that we want to balance energy intake with energy expenditure. Majority of you, almost all of you, have done the 3-day calorie count, looked at your BMR and your TEE, and know if you're in debt or if in excess, and that's just basically what we're talking about here. Now, understand that when we talk about balancing energy, we're also talking about balancing nutrition. So very low calorie diets are usually poor in nutrition, and then very high calorie diets, we tend to go in the extreme, and we're bringing in either too much as far as fats and the cholesterol levels. So we really do want to find a balance and make sure that we're using the calories that we're taking in. There is an idea called the set point, and it occurs in our hypothalamus. Our body really likes to regulate us at a certain weight and temperature and all the other things, but certainly at a weight, and it takes time to change that set point. So that set point is established within your brain. So it takes a bit of time to change it. That's why crash diets tend not to work as well, because we're doing it in such a quick way. Our brain doesn't adjust. It just says, uh-oh, they're cutting calories. It's a fasting state. Let's take those calories and put them into fat. So it starts to make adjustments in that case, but it doesn't necessarily mean healthy adjustments. So we could get some temporary changes, but we want our long-term changes, especially if we're trying to maintain a lower weight. Same applies for people who are trying to gain weight. You got to do it slow. You got to do it slow and add it in to change that set point. We talked about resting metabolic rate. We talked about how that plus your DIT, which is your diet-induced thermogenesis, makes up your BMR. The only way we can influence BMR is to influence resting metabolic rate by increasing muscle mass. So once again, we can influence resting metabolic rate by influencing muscle mass. Of course, we can influence the whole energy expenditure package by exercising more. So those are your 3 components to energy expenditure. We don't have a lot of control over DIT or RMR, although we do have a little, but we have a lot of control over TEE. Okay, some causes of excess energy, certainly active causes are large portion size and frequently eating meals. Passively, we tend to eat caloric-rich foods like sodas and things like that. Sometimes we don't have a lot of options as to what we can eat, or we find that we don't have a lot of time to make food, so we end up doing things that are prepackaged or fast food. And of course, those have more of a caloric punch than we probably necessarily need. We also need to be aware that there's these sensory specific foods that either cause us to be full or not full. Believe it or not, caffeine is one of those things that decreases our ability to register that we're full or satiety. Speeds up our metabolism, but at the same time tells us we're not full, which is very kind of interesting with caffeine. So be aware of that. So once again, a balanced diet on foods that are not mass produced, that are whole foods and lots of fruits and vegetables tends to be the way to go. Lots of varieties tend to be a way to go. Interesting chart on high fructose corn syrup and obesity rates in the USA. The brown line is high fructose corn syrup and the red line is obesity rates. Starting in about the 1970s is when high fructose corn syrup, and it'll be one of your assignments, is to look at the history of high fructose corn syrup and what we've done about it, because it has been a problem. But you can see around 2000, we've made some changes and we dropped off on high fructose corn syrup, and obesity rates didn't change. They're still going up. It seems as though we have made ourselves addicted to sugar, which many of you may either relate to or understand. But you can see that the lines are there. It may not be necessarily a cause and effect, because that means the lines would be right on top of each other, but there certainly is a strong correlation between the introduction of high fructose corn syrup consumption, the introduction of it and the consumption of it, and obesity rates. So pretty interesting chart there. I want you to remember this saying, fat is burned in the flame of aerobic exercise. Dr. Olson was a professor of mine at Brigham Young. He's retired now, but he was an expert on fitness. He wrote a bunch of textbooks, became pretty wealthy because of that, and had some interesting sayings, and this was one of them. Fat is burned in the flame of aerobic exercise. Basically what that means, and I'm going to ask you this on the test, try to explain what Philip Olson meant by that. And this is what he meant. If we want to burn calories from fat, aerobic exercise is the best way to do that. The reason for it is because aerobic exercise works with a constant heart rate greater than 20 minutes is usually when we kick into that energy system. What that means is the aerobic energy system produces ATP with oxygen, and its primary fuel can be fat. So if you don't have any carbohydrates on board, you've used them all up in the first 20 minutes of your exercise, and now you're solely relying on calories from fat. Aerobic work is a really good way to burn it. So aerobic work is 20 minutes or longer at a heart rate that's typically below 60%. If you think about that, right, the closer we get to 60%, the better the intensity, the more calories we burn. But it's any exercise greater than 20 minutes or anything greater than 20 minutes. So if you're asleep and your heart rate's at 30% of your max, you're in an aerobic state. You're burning calories primarily from fat. So that's what he means. Fat is burned in the flame of aerobic exercise. Go aerobic and you'll burn more calories from fat. You may have to decrease your intensity. You may have to go a little longer, but that's where it's at. So that's Philip Olson for you. So understand what biological impedance is. This is our new, I wouldn't say it's gold standard yet, but a lot of people are using it. Understand the pitfalls with body mass index. You should understand what it looks like with whole body and hydrodensity, air displacement and water displacement. Certainly remember the models of body composition, and please remember the quote from Philip Olson that fat is burned in the flame of aerobic exercise, as long as that aerobic exercise is 20 minutes or longer and your heart rate is pretty consistently below 60%. Okay, my friends, that is chapter 11, and text, email me if you have any questions. I hope this helped.